Hello and welcome to The Print. Today we are with Chitra Subramaniam, who is an investigative journalist and the author of Bofors Gate, a journalist's pursuit of truth. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am.
Thank you for inviting me.
So for starters, what made you, revisit this story all these decades later? Why did you choose to write the book now?
There is a time and a place for everything. And I felt that now, after so many years, I needed to put my story together. Because, yes, there is an investigation, as you say, but there's also what I went through as a mother, as a wife, as a human being, with all my questions. And there was nothing that my version, it's not a view, my view of what really happened was not there. So I started writing this book, and it was a difficult process because, it was not easy emotionally, intellectually. So I put it together, and then I decided, okay, hey, this is a book. This is a book, yes.
And as you're saying, the book is simultaneously, it's extremely personal. There's, so many personal details. There's one point, I think, in which you say that your son is competing for attention, your attention with the telephone and the fax machine. And why did you think it was so important to weave together these two stories, both the personal and the professional?
Because they happened together. I mean, there was no way I could separate them because that would be dishonest. It would be dishonest to the child, dishonest to the story, and dishonest to myself and to all around us. So there was no way I could separate the two. And yes, there was a competition Nikhil would, I used to compete, and I used to compete for my own attention. And I used to be scared of myself. I mean, what are you doing? Are you a mother? Are you a journalist? Are you a wife? So, there was no way I could tell this story differently, or I would be dishonest. In fact, my editor, the first editor, Narayani Basu, she said, your voices have to come together. So I asked her, what is a voice? So she said, Chitra, either you do a story that is in the public domain, that anyone can do, or you tell your story. And then I also thank another friend of mine who lives with cancer, Bettina B. She said that, your voice has to come together. So you can't tell, I don't think any woman can tell a story of a professional success independent of her personal life. I don't believe that.
And you've mentioned your personal sacrifices in great detail, that writing this book, writing this story came at the cost of, immense personal, personal sacrifices,
You mean the
personal,
investigation?
yeah, the investigation. And and as you're saying, it's so much about being a woman journalist. And while you were investigating a story, you also write about not telling your sources that you were pregnant.
Yes.
That's something that's so telling. So
Yeah, yes. And then what was I trying to hide?
yeah, and but it was obviously, it's a very masculine world. So how were you navigating that? This arms manufacturing, corruption at the highest level. It's a very masculine world. So how was
With,
that as
with difficulty, and uh, since I'm tall, I don't look pregnant. And suddenly I said, what is that supposed to mean? I am pregnant, damn it. And then there's this arms dealer giving me a lecture about having, don't go to Geneva. They'll hurry up with cesarean, you should get a peridural. So here I'm taking all these notes. And it was difficult. And suddenly I realized that my pregnancy was everyone's business, and then getting lectures, it was very difficult. And it was not easy, and navigating, I mean, now you have these words of how do you navigate and all that. I just navigated. I just navigated, you know and that's exactly, I mean, I don't want to tell you a lie. I just navigated, swam. I wish I could give you like a thing. I just went, you know there was nothing in the fridge. Yeah, there's nothing to eat. Then, they had to pump my milk. Oh, there's nothing. I mean, there is no rule. And I really, really, really want to tell everyone, especially young women journalists, that don't let anybody fool you into believing that there is like a method. You only have to make sure that you eat well, that your vitamins are there, and you take care of your health. My daughter is, she's coming in. She's coming in from New York. She's 30, she's in her mid 30s, and I've told her there is no rule. And a woman will be judged for everything else than the work. She'll be judged for the way she looks, the way she talks, the way she doesn't talk. So it's tough, but it's good.
And now, I mean, of course, the most sort of damning part of the book is that the story isn't over yet,
Yes.
and that there are documents that the Indian government is yet to declassify. And I mean, why do you think that successive governments have stalled? We have the BJP in power. Why haven't they declassified these documents?
I have got this question asked, uh, and the only answer is whatever answer they say, if it is not the truth, I'm not going to accept it. Because why are they sitting on stuff? It's their problem, it's not mine. You need to tell us what's going on. Is the commission, are the commissions, like the arms dealer said, 12%? Is it 8.5, 18.5, like in the secret documents? 3% you made it up as winding up charges. So you've got to stop this. You've got to tell us what you know. After all, a government fell on this story, so
But what has the government's response been when you have attempted to reach out to them? Has it been stone cold silence? I mean, you have okay, you've never.
no.
Yeah. So I mean, your sort of pursuit of this story, has that come to an end now? I mean,
My pursuit, I think that I did my bit to the extent that the boxers came to India. I think that the next generation should take it up. And I would be very happy to work with anybody who wants to pursue it. Yeah, because I think my role now is not, I'm 67. So my role would be to sort of, if people want me to, anyone who wants me to help them, to guide them, I'm very happy to do that.
brings me to my next question actually. If this kind of scandal were to have unfolded today, in the digital age, in this era of being so hyper connected, do you think it would have unfolded differently? How do you think public reaction would have been, and how do you think the government's response would have been?
Both. It's a very nice question, because there have been times when I have said to myself, if I had the social media then, I would not have been dependent on any editor. But it cuts both ways, because there would have been. Actually, I'm not sensitive to trolling. I've gone past that.
And I think you went through far more intense
Yeah,
real life
real
trolling.
life
I
stuff.
think the online, yeah.
I went through real
Yeah,
life dangers
yeah,
and some stupid
exactly,
trolls.
yeah.
And exactly. Thank you for saying that. And I feel anybody who's been through real stuff wouldn't be a troll. Can't. It's not possible to be a troll. Someone I met said that it's a very cruel book. I said, what do you mean cruel book? And he said that no journalist can ever write a book again without reading your book. So I thought it was a compliment. But social media has its uses. If you know how to navigate, if you know how to use this in a correct way, then I think it's useful. But not abusing people, or just saying bad things about them. This is something else I find very difficult. I find just saying bad things about people terrible. I don't know what you think. Just saying any rubbish about people, any rubbish, without responsibility. And where is that coming from? That can't be coming in from newsrooms. It must be coming from some deep personal meanness.
But how do you think the government's reaction would have been if this were to take place today? Say with this government in power or any other government in power.
If social media had been there.
Yeah, if social media had been there and then you also had a scandal of, this scale, whatever its today's equivalent would be.
See, in those days they said CIA, CIA. Now they would have said Soros and USAID and all that. The usual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much faith in governments, because I think it's their job. All governments lie. It's just a question of, are you being stylish about it, or are you being, clumsy? So they would have said something, usual, foreign hand hai, ye hai, wo hai. But and I don't want to be negative either. I think we should pursue. See, it's the job of my prime minister. His job description was to defend the country. So he bought good guns. And it's my job description to find out what happened. So there are two different jobs, you know.
And again, carrying on from that, how do you compare, today's investigative journalism? I mean, not in today's investigative journalism, not necessarily even what's happening, globally. And especially if you are to compare the time when you were pursuing the story and today's time, how do you think the concept of whistleblowing has evolved over the years? Do you think that there are still people who are willing to, become your sources to, to sort of let this out? Yeah.
So the concept has remained the same. I think people are, in fact, if you have the time on Monday for the launch, do come, because Sten Lindström, who's my whistleblower's daughter, is releasing the book. It's lovely. I think there will always be honest people in a government who want to stand with the truth. And both Sten and Snowman, they excluded all the all the avenues open to them before they decided to speak to me. So I think truth telling is not a concept. I think truth telling is who you are. I mean, you tell the truth because something wrong happened. Whistleblower is a name given to you, and it's a good name. But truth telling is a concept that is as nice and as old as human beings. And I think today, if someone uses the social media to be able to do that, first of all, I don't know how many people have access, but it's a good thing to tell the truth. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
But I mean, how were you able to, nurture these sources and these networks? Because I mean, you come from a completely different context. You're a woman, you're Indian. So it's two for them. It would be come from two separate worlds. So how were you able to hone those relationships?
What a lovely question. I'm trying to. So meeting the source was, I mean, literally telling him, listen, if you're not going to help me, you're helping the bad people. I mean, I went to Stockholm. We had this meeting, and I thought I was very impressive. And talking to him, Sten Lindsay, he was sketching his roofs in his house. So I said, I went to Stockholm, and for the whole week he didn't show up. I didn't get this phone call. I was interviewing for the au pairs. I said he's not going to come. I've been taken for a ride. I'd rather be home. And then he called. So how did I nurture? People tell me, or other people who have been working with me, they say that I look honest because that I don't fiddle. I don't fiddle with stuff. For even Snowman told me that you are somebody. You're okay. So what can I say? Nurturing is to be never fiddle. Be honest. Remember that curiosity is a good thing, not inquisitiveness. Build slowly. Don't rush to print. When someone gives you information, wait. Wait. Take your time. Do your research. Don't jump to conclusions, and give time to time. Give time to time. If someone is trying to plant a story on you, don't write it. If you feel it's a plant, don't write it the next day. Wait. So, nurturing a source, and it's a lifetime thing. I mean, if I write a story, I don't want to be ashamed to go and look back tomorrow morning at them. Imagine you write a story and you write rubbish. How will you ever face your source? And when you put pen to paper, it has a responsibility. Every word counts, which is when I think today, when on social media they make a mistake, then they correct themselves. How can you do it? Reputations are destroyed with your mist. How can you do it?
And so you also say in the book that this is also a book about, the state of Indian journalism. So what you were writing a story that involved multiple stakeholders across the world, and it was a very international story taking place in a global context. So whereas your editors were in India, and you talk about this a lot in the book, but how was this sort of constant act of having to translate and having to sort of explain to them and tell them that, this is what has happened? It's a constant, I assume, act of processing it for yourself and then processing it for your editor.
Who also had different
Yeah.
ways to look at it. It's a very good question. Actually, it's a deep question because there is a source, and then there is me, and there is my editor. The relationship is not the same. I mean, Mr. Lindstrom didn't want to speak to anybody else. I had to report to an editor. So, and then I realized that in this case, Mr. N. Ram had he had other things to dance to, which had nothing to do with journalism. So then it became an issue. You know, many hats. I'm now your colleague. I'm now your boss. So it was not easy. In the beginning, it was fine because I was getting all the documents, and suddenly I found myself up against a wall. Sitting on the information about Mr. Gandhi, threatening Mr. Gandhi before publishing it. All that was difficult, very difficult.
And now that, I mean, I assume that this book is also, taking stock of what was the biggest story to have. And so now that you have done that, I mean, what would you say were the critical moments of your investigation? Was like, which were the documents? Was it finding the source? What was it?
Several. There were several. First of all, the critical moments came when I had to, when I saw the accounts which said Lotus Tulip Mom Law linked to the Hindujas. Then the SNAB report, the Swedish National Audit Bureau report, which was redacted and sent to the government of India. Then finding the secret meeting between the secret cover-up meeting, which such big bureaucrats like Gopi Arora or S.K. Bhatnagar or N.N. Vora, all these were top bureaucrats, gold standard bureaucrats at that time, talking to the top, Bofors people. It was a cover-up, like a tuition. Don't say this, don't say that, like a tuition time. And then, of course, the big document was the Gandhi trustee lawyer. The name Gandhi appeared. First time I saw that, I told my husband, this is Gandhi. So we called somebody, a friend who didn't know what it was. So we had a blind test. It was Gandhi. So, first of all, I didn't believe Gandhi was involved. Why should I believe? I thought, why does he need money? Right. And he said there would be, when he became prime minister, he said he was going to clean India and all that. I was very ambitious. I said, oh, nice guy, very nice. We'll become a superpower and all that. I mean, I have also the right to be ambitious, no? So, I can be ambitious for my country without being in electoral politics. Right. So, it was difficult for me on many levels. I felt personally let down. Why are you laughing?
No, I just think it's so interesting because nowadays, people are just so cynical, and I mean,
Then you shouldn't be in journalism.
yeah. And but do you believe still that good journalism has the potential to topple governments even today?
Yes.
Do you think?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And we should hold together. And I believe Indian journalism is top class. I don't believe that, I don't believe in this everything. And I genuinely believe there's a pushback. Look at the pushback. I'm, working with the News Minute, the News Laundry. We have to push back. You don't have any business to be in journalism if you don't believe in it. Go and do something else. And if you're cynical, you're dead in the water. And maybe this sounds very hard, but you should not be. And you don't have to be toppling governments. You can figure out what's going on, in the local locality. Is the not the DMC, DDMC, DDM, what's it called?
The MCD.
NDMC, are they doing a good job? It's a public service, damn it.
Yeah.
It's a public service. Is the water in the Kumbh clean? Is the Yamuna clean? You should find out. It's not about toppling governments. It's about telling the truth.
And lastly, what do you firstly think are the ingredients of good investigative journalism? And what are the certain, personality traits that you feel are needed to be an investigative journalist?
Be a pain, pesky. Because I think if you're not pesky, and I mean that, I don't have to be rude. It shouldn't be confused with being rude. You have to be persistent, pesky, and polite. Yeah, be persistent, pesky, and polite, and read. Don't take anything for granted, certainly not what governments tell you and their handouts. And do your own research, be respectful of people, and just go for it. And don't be afraid. And if you're afraid of something, share that with your editor. But talk, be curious, talk it out. If something is bothering you, go after it. There's a good chance you'll be right.
Okay, thank you so much for
My
joining us,
pleasure.
ma'am.